Ça te fait joli là.
Ben, moun te vini pour filmer.
We believe that history is important and that it's important that we tell our own stories, that we dig deep in what happened in our community to tell the most compelling things about our past. Our challenge is to just always do better every day, to dig deeper, to tell better stories. Just when we think we've got something figured out, another artifact or another piece of history will walk into the museum and sends us on another path and another way of investigating or interpreting. Or we just always got to ask ourselves, is this the story we want to tell to today's children? Is this the history that we want remembered? So it's important, for example, when we do our Slavery to Civil Rights tour, which tours these cabins here, that we're telling our local stories, our stories of resistance, of freedom, of education, of the things that were going on that are more compelling. We don't want it to just be, the tragedy, and you can get traumatized when you live this history, when you talk about this history day in and day out. It's something that we talk about in our staff, that this can really be re-traumatizing for people to live and experience every day. And so we also want to be sure to tell those good stories of survival, of resistance, of the quest for freedom, of those that stood up against others in their time to speak the truth.
Local stories are national stories.
Oh yes, the local stories always weave into the national, but when you're talking about national stories, it's so much more abstract. But when you can really say, nope, right here, this case, this happened in Louisiana, this was right here in your backyard, it really brings the national narrative home.
One of the things that I say to our visitors when I'm trying to get them to understand the geography and the demographics of this area between New Orleans and Baton Rouge is that the landscape is Black community, sugarcane field, tourism plantation house, petrochemical plant. Black community, sugarcane field, petrochemical company, plantation tourism house. This land of sugarcane plantations is now the land of the petrochemical industry. And we struggle with trying to survive still in this land that was foreign to us when we were brought upriver from New Orleans and ended up working here on the plantations. Now, many times the only option that young people have when they graduate from high school is to go to work in the petrochemical industry. I live here in this region of South Louisiana on the Mississippi River, where I say that sugar was king. Some like to say that cotton was king and sugar was queen. But for me, sugar was king. Sugar was like gold. Sugar is tied to blood for me when I think about it, because I think about all of the pain and suffering and the lash to keep people working to produce more sugar, to produce more money. I also think about sugar in terms that the enslaved people and my ancestors who lived on this river, who worked at the plantations, provided the free labor that contributed to the economy and culture, not only the economy and culture of this parish, but the economy and culture of this state, the economy and culture of this nation, and their free labor contributed to the economy and culture of this world.
This place is a beast. You know, you call it Puff the Magic Dragon when you pass on the highway and you see all the smoke billowing out of the smokestacks. And it takes a lot of cane, a lot of infrastructure to support grinding that that amount of cane in making sugar. And there's a lot of people in this area that depend on the sugar industry for a source of income. I know I was raised, my father was a sugar farmer. Like I said, for 8 generations, my family has pretty much been raised from sugar. And there's a lot of other families in this area that work at different factories. You know, the farmers make money and they spend it in town for parts on their tractors and everything else. But it's a big industry. I think the whole industry wide is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Impact for Louisiana, about $3 billion, maybe. I've heard the latest, but you know, when you look at that, I mean, it's massive to South Louisiana. Our sugar that we produce here, most of it is, majority of it is sold to Domino's, which they refine it into white sugar, and some of it goes to La Cassine, to the Bayou Rum distillery, and they turn sugar into the next best thing, which is a bourbon or a rum.
Yeah, there's approximately 11 mills. We have a relationship with most of those mills. Some we get more than others, but we have very strong working relationship with the mills in Louisiana. We ship 125 different products out of here. That includes liquid sugar, that includes bulk sugar, that's packets and cubes and 4 and 10 pound bags, that's super sacks. That also includes liquid products that are specific to bakers, special formulations for them. We have a proprietary product called co-crystallized. That's basically pourable brown sugar that we make. And we'll sell some that's highly refined for pharmaceuticals, for spirit manufacturers. We work with Patu extensively. And most of the sugar we get comes in by barges. So we'll get a couple of barges a day. We'll unload a couple of barges a day. They're going to be about 3 million pounds a barge. That's the equivalent of about 50 truckloads of product if it came in by road. That is raw sugar. So the product that the mills are producing is raw sugar. It's not a foodstuff yet. We're going to take that, we're going to refine it, take out whatever impurities are left and turn it into an edible foodstuff. Refining cane sugar is both science and an art. The art is what we haven't figured out to write an equation about yet. And eventually we'll figure that out and it'll be less and less art and more science. Here, this is one of the better technical refineries that there is. And so a big part of what we do now, we consider to be science. Part of the reason that we are so good at the science of refining is some of the very technically capable people that we've had that have been here for years studying not just sugar refining, but the Chalmette refinery and understanding how do you adjust the equipment to be very efficient at producing good quality granulated sugar.
This sequence of jars gives you an idea of the various products and byproducts produced in the sugarcane industry, beginning with bagasse and raw sugarcane juice and ending with raw sugar. And we're at the West Baton Rouge Museum in Port Allen, which is essentially devoted to the history of the sugarcane industry in Louisiana. We're unofficially known as the Sugar Museum. They made some initial attempts to grow the sugarcane in Louisiana. For whatever reason, it wasn't quite as successful as some of the other cash crops like indigo and tobacco. It wasn't until they started crystallizing the sugar with the Jamaica train system that it really took off as a cash crop. Largely overseen by Etienne de Boré, who was the first to crystallize sugar using the Jamaica train process. And he did it in New Orleans on his plantation, which is now the location of the Audubon Zoo.
Sugar was extremely labor intensive from the aspect of a day being 16 hours. So you're thinking that from the time you're up in the morning before daylight to walk into the fields. You're working a 16-hour day. After leaving the fields, sometimes you would go and work in the mill. If you look at the names on the list that we have here from the Homus House plantation, you will also see the word implined or badly implined. And when I first saw that inventory list, I immediately went to the dictionary looking for the word implined, spelled E-M-P-L-I-N-E-D. Couldn't find it anywhere. And I talked to an anthropologist at LSU who had done extensive research on sugarcane plantations in the Caribbean and here in Louisiana. And he said the only place he ever saw that word used is in the slave inventories on sugarcane plantations, and it meant missing fingers or appendages. Because you're working very fast with that machete and that cane knife, the machinery and conveyor belts in the refineries sometimes would catch your fingers, or you're working very fast. And so that meant missing an appendage or missing a finger, usually caused by that cane knife.
Until relatively recent times, sugarcane was harvested by hand. These are a variety of specialized tools that were used in the harvest, but the quintessential tool was the cane knife. Now, workers would harvest each stalk individually in 3 motions. First, they would chop at the bottom to remove the stalk from the roots. They would chop a second time at the top to remove the tuft of leaves that comes out the top of a sugarcane stalk. Then they would reverse the cane knife to use the hook on the back. They would pass that hook down the sugarcane stalk to strip the leaves along the sides. Only then was the stalk ready to be sent to the mill for grinding. So each individual stalk was cut by hand this way into the 1940s and 50s. It was extremely labor intensive. So imagine that your workday was 10 to 12 hours of these repetitive motions, chopping the stalk at the bottom and top, flipping the knife and stripping the stalk over and over and over again all day long.
So when we talk about the industrialization of sugar, you know, here in Louisiana, I think first of wbr-museum, who invented the vacuum pan process for crystallizing sugar in 1843. And we say that he is the father or the founder of chemical engineering. He created that process, removing the process of boiling that hot syrup and melting down that sugar in those big sugar kettles, where it was hand ladled by enslaved people from one large, if you can imagine, an 8-foot in diameter kettle, 6-foot in diameter kettle, 5-foot in diameter kettle, ladling that hot syrup that had an open fire under each kettle. You can imagine if you've ever made candy before, or if you've ever made any type of icing where you had to melt sugar on a stove. If you've ever had that hot liquid hit your skin, you can imagine what it must have been like for those men and women who might have been shirtless, without shoes, that open fire, hot coals rolling toward their feet. There was no OSHA then, I tell young people.
The Jamaica train method was the primary means of sugar production until the whole process was revolutionized by Norbert Rieu. He was a free person of color born in New Orleans, but he was educated in Paris at the Polytechnic Institute in France. And what he did was he decided that the sugar production methods needed to be modernized. He was from early on very interested in steam and the use of steam in chemical processes, and decided to apply this to sugar production. So he developed these vacuum pan and evaporator machines to produce sugar to replace the Jamaica train method. The Jamaica train method, as we said earlier, was dangerous, extremely labor intensive, and time consuming. And Norbert believed that he could do it better.
When Norbert Rieu created this process for crystallizing sugar with his evaporator pan, it was now a system where he captured the steam in these three apparatus and recycled that steam into energy. And so there was no longer a need for those open kettles and that hand labor.
Absolutely succeeded.
So,
his process was hugely successful, hugely influential, and in fact is still being used today in multiple industries, not only the sugarcane industry. The basic process that he devised is still in place. It's been much updated and is now hugely computerized, but the essential mechanics of what he imagined are still being used. His other idea was that they could reuse the bagasse. Bagasse is the fibery materials left over process. And so this bagasse, these fibery materials, were put right back into the process by being burned in the boilers. And so the fiber was used to heat the juice. The sugar.
One of the byproducts is bagasse. And what bagasse is after all the water and moisture and sugar is crushed out of the sugar cane. Yeah. It's like almost like a powdery, fibrous substance. That is what we burn in the boilers. We're pretty much 100% energy sustainable burning bagasse. There's very little natural gas that we have to burn to supplement our power supply. So that's an important part of what we do in being able to run our factory off of the byproduct of our crop.
It made it hugely efficient, much more cost effective. It required much less workforce, and it was much safer. And it made waves. It fueled an entire era of massive sugarcane production that Louisiana hadn't known before that.
Right, so you have to think about this too. So now we're in this era after the Civil War, after Reconstruction. Dr. Laurie and this benevolent society come along, and they realized that blacks needed to be more self-sufficient, or you had to be self-sufficient. You have to think about it. There was no Red Cross, there was no welfare. So you had to be self-sufficient. There were no white insurance companies that were going to insure you. So they buy this plantation and create a farm where they're growing food, and they're also growing sugarcane, and then they find oil. Oil is found. The Calcasieu oil field finds oil on their property. And so the Benevolent Society starts to reap some of the benefits from these oil, the residuals of, of the oil. And it's really amazing how African Americans were so self-sufficient. And there was a time before there was so much government assistance that people had to take care of themselves and take care of each other. And it really warms my heart to see the names of these benevolent societies, Shining Star, Loving Sisters of Charity, bright sunshine in the morning, benevolent societies, all up and down this river in some of these communities that were called free towns. The first communities right next to the plantations along this river and along the bayou. Every now and then you'll come across a little town that's called or referred to as Freetown because it was the first settlement of the people who stayed and did not leave once emancipation came. And so
the Patus originally came from France to grow grapes. It didn't work too well, so we ended up growing sugarcane. The rest is history, because we are one of the largest processors in the state of sugarcane. This is brown sugar. It looks kind of white, but it's less sugar in the raw. Our sugar that we produce here, majority of it is sold to Domino's, which they refine it into white sugar.
The refinery here processes 7 million pounds of raw sugar a day.
On any one given day, we process about 20,000 tons of cane, and that equates to about 800 trucks from Opelousas to Bunkie area, around the Franklin area, that all come over here to process that cane.
The Louisiana farmers are doing a better and better job at getting yield per acre. We're seeing that as a pretty robust cane crop the last couple of years, and I think that's been a fairly steady trend. Land loss here would be, if it's a threat to cane growing, it's a threat to us because we're very closely tied to the fields and to the mills in Louisiana. And so as they go, we go.
We don't have anywhere to go as far as the sugarcane industry. We can't go up to higher ground because that's where the subdivisions are going. You know, so we pushed back to all these little low-lying areas and on the coastline, place where nobody wants to live. That's where we at now. And we have to protect our coast to have a sustainable industry. I'm the 8th generation. I want 8 more after me. You know, hopefully my kids will want to do this, carry it another generation. And we need to protect our coast so that they can have that opportunity.
It's a lot of history on this river.